Well, welcome to the program, David. It's great to have you back.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. It's good to be back as well.
We were just joking about the fact that it was 3 years ago, sitting in your office. I had one microphone trying to record. It was a very different program 3 years ago when we started. So thank you for coming back. I'm intrigued to hear what's changed in that time.
Yeah, no, it was, if I remember correctly, it was about 3 or 4 months just after I started at Stockland. So I was still, trying to learn property and what was I actually doing in the seat and understanding what they were doing. So it is great to be back and more than happy to talk through the last 3 years, which has been, quite extraordinary when you put in all the things that we've done from an organisational perspective, but obviously against the backdrop of COVID and the pandemic and the continuation of it in 2021 as well.
Now, when we did sit down back 3 years ago, you were the treasurer at Stockland. I understand that role has evolved a little bit and you've got more under your remit. So talk us through what's your current remit now?
Yeah, so group treasurer still, that's the primary role, although in the last sort of eight or 9 months, I've taken over the general manager role of corporate procurement. So one of the reasons we thought about that was obviously, Treasury looks at a lot of things around innovation, banking services, payments. So it felt like it was a reasonably nice fit to bring that under that banner as well. Clearly, there's a relationship aspect to that at the same time. So we're leveraging all the relationships that we have across, our key stakeholders and the banking sector, but also into the payments area and also into the sort of supply network as well. But clearly primarily focused, on treasury and all the things that we continue to do, around liquidity, financial risk management, balance sheet management, our relationships, investor programs, those things.
And it has been an interesting time. What have been some of the highlights in those 3 years in your time at Stockland?
Yeah, look, it's 3 years is a long time in any organisation. I think when we first met, as I said, we sort of spend the first 3 to 6 months just understanding what the organisation is, what they've done in the past, and then, the things that you'd like to make changes to. When I look back in the last 3 years, there's probably sort of 5 or 6 real key things that we've done, which I think have sort of moved the dial. The first one was we had a very sort of disjointed bank debt platform. And what we had is, we had agreements from the early 2000s, agreements from 2015. So effectively what we did then is we actually restructured all of our bank debt documentation and put it on a single platform. We made it consistent with where current market terms and conditions were. And then as part of that process, we went through a global consent process as well, where we changed the number of the financial undertakings across all of our debt programs, both in Australia under the Australian MTM program, but also under the Euro MTM program and the USPP as well. So that was a significant piece of work. And I really think that sort of modernised our debt framework and our debt policies going forward. The second one from my perspective is obviously then really thinking about diversification across the book. So as I mentioned, we are global debt issuers, and we also have quite a small core banking group that was in our bank debt program. So we extended that from 6 banks to around about 12, and we extended the duration of that portfolio as well. And the reason behind that is obviously you then improve the refinancing risk around those liquidity facilities, but you also get diversification and also add capacity to the group as well. So that was a really important thing we did particularly over the last sort of 12 to 18 months. We implemented a relationship management plan for our key stakeholders. And what that really does is making sure that the dialogue that we have with our key stakeholders, and that includes rating agencies, investors, our banking group, key advisors as well, is that we provide really open, transparent information to them. We make ourselves available when they would like to speak to us. And we have an ongoing sort of quarterly update program where we make sure that investors on the back of our quarterly releases, they're up to date and they understand where the organisation's travelling. Probably last and certainly not least is interest rate risk management. Obviously, we've been through a pretty interesting time over the last 12 to 18 months with, the curve continuing to fall on the back of cuts in interest rates, RBA and global monetary policy being very, very low. But we have seen quite a lot of variation in the swap curve, particularly over the last sort of 6 to 12 months, where we've seen it go down, steepen and do those things as well. So about 18 months ago, we did a fairly significant restructure of our derivative portfolio, did a lot of work around our weighted average cost of debt, and we start to think about our debt profile as well. So that's probably the sort of 4 or 5 key things we've really sort of focused on over the last 18 months or 2 years.
Really, in the last 2 years, COVID has been a major player in people working from home and not being in the office. How has your team sort of adapted, and how have they coped in that situation?
Yeah, I think you sort of get back to I talked about a relationship management plan. I think this is really important when you're running a team, whether it's in the office or whether externally. Constant and continuous communication is really important, and engagement. When we stepped into the sort of work from home scenario sort of middle of last year, funny that we're back here again, of course, but the middle of last year, we have 30-minute meetings every day, and they can be at varying times. And we have check-ins as we go along. And what we tried to do was also have a bit of fun Thursday or Friday afternoons, where we would sort of meet for team drinks and those things as well. So that's more about just trying to maintain some level of engagement. From a work perspective, we had dedicated calls where we were very specific around, particularly on a Monday, we would say, what's due this week, if I can put it in that term, and then what are we thinking about, and then how do we want to address each of those things. And it's really interesting. I'm for part of my other work is I'm co-chair of the Wellbeing EAG at Stockland at the moment as well, and we've been doing a lot of talk about well-being and focusing on the things. And I think everyone's got a little bit of cognitive overload right now as we speak. And what we've been trying to talk about, and one of the messages we've been getting is, think of the balls you have at work, glass. Think of the glass balls. They're the ones that you don't want to drop. So they're the ones that you really want to make sure that you're focusing on. And then how do you continue to go through the different types of work you need to do as well. But we've been really engaged. I think the team has performed really, really well in this environment.
David, I think pre-COVID, Treasury was definitely one of those jobs where everyone would have said it's an office-based job. We've got to be in the office. How have you found the team has coped, and how has the perception of Treasury changed within the organisation?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think, I did a video for our flexibility EAG a couple of, probably late last year, actually, early this year, talking about flexibility. And look, I had a view, being in the market now for 20 or 30 years, I had a view that, Treasury was a bit of a desk-bound job. We needed all the screens to do our work, and there was that, banter that we would have to have with the office to sort of, do the job. My view has changed dramatically. I think now we've proven with technology and making sure that you keep engagement levels high, that you can work anywhere. And, from my perspective, the team has embraced that. The organisation, Stockland, more broadly, has been very flexible in its thinking around, the working environment anyway. But we have an agreed pattern with our team, from a work from home basis, and that won't change going forward. So typically we have a Monday and Wednesday in the office on a synchronised basis, so all of the team members are in, and then on those other 3 days, you're typically out of the office for 2. So myself personally, I've been working sort of a 3, maybe a 4-day week in the office. Clearly, we are now all back working from home. But I think times have changed, and I think minds have shifted on how you can actually do your job away from the office.
And so, does that mean, David, moving forward, that the way that you operate as a Treasury function would be 2, maybe 3 days in the office, and then the rest from home?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think we've agreed, we've got a hub and home model is what we call it. And typically what that means is, as I said, we've agreed that 3 days is the minimum in the office for the team. Mondays and Wednesdays will be synchronised. I will typically be 4 days, but that will vary as well. So my team will be in somewhere around 3 or 4 days a week, and I see that going forward.
And obviously that works, it's much easier in an environment where you've got a settled team. Have you had to hire or bring new staff in during that time, and how has that gone in terms of bringing new people in?
Yeah, I've been a little bit fortunate in the sense that most of my recruitment over the last 2 years has been at times when we've been in the office. So we've effectively been able to bring them in and then obviously set them up and then give them all the technology they need to then be able to work from home as we speak. On the procurement side, which is really interesting, though, I've got 2 recent hires. One will start on Monday, the other one will start next Monday, and obviously we won't get the opportunity to engage on physical basis. So all the technology has gone out to them. And our first meeting will be, and their first meetings with people within the organisation will be similar to what you and I are doing now, either Zoom and over Teams. So it does create a little bit of I think, an initial sort of lack of engagement is probably not the right word, but because you don't have that physicality there, there's always that sort of genuine sort of feeling you lose over a computer screen. So the way we do that is obviously just continue to have them on a regular basis.
And do you think that will change your process moving forward, or once you're back in the office, your recruitment process would go back to what it was before?
I think the recruitment process will go back to the way it is before. I think, as I said, once you will recruit, and you obviously agree a position in relation to flexibility and for each individual as well. One of the guys that was in my procurement team prior to that was based out of Tasmania, so he was never in the office. So he was, 5 days a week from, a little remote town in Tasmania doing the procurement function. So there's certainly opportunities there and abilities to do that. But I think there will be, and we've got teams that across Stockland there, are in Melbourne, we've got people in Rockhampton, we've got assets across the country. So we're certainly experienced in having different people in different locations doing different roles.
Obviously, with the lockdown and people working from home, networking has been quite challenging. How have you approached that during lockdown and, in order to sort of keep your networks live?
Yeah, once again, it's a really good question. I was having a chat yesterday afternoon with another treasurer from another route just around how we're keeping abreast of markets and how we're keeping abreast of things that are going on. Because one thing I do find when you're working from home is you're very focused on what you need to get done, and you're sort of not paying attention in many aspects to all the other stuff that's coming on, and sort of that build up of your email list as well. There's a couple of things that I do. The first thing I do is I put a podcast on in the morning from a markets perspective. So, I typically chuck on the NAB Markets podcast. That goes on in the background as I'm reading my economic data as well. I then allow 30 minutes every second day to just talk to people in the market. And this is from a market perspective. So last night I had a conversation with four people that I talk to regularly, just understanding where debt capital markets are, what are they seeing in the market, obviously we're in results period for a lot of organisations at the moment, how are they looking forward. I spoke to the FX guys and some interest rates just to get a feel for where that's going as well. And then you've got your investor base and all the other stakeholders you need to deal with as well, that from a communication perspective. So, there's always ongoing dialogue. So you've got to be making the time to do that. As I said earlier, you can get bogged down in looking at your inbox and looking at the things you're working at. I do a lot of calls to a lot of people when I'm going for my afternoon walk to get a bit of fresh air and a bit of clear headspace.
Obviously, the conferences have all been cancelled, and those places that make it easy to network. How have you found getting virtual benefit, in whatever networking you're doing? Has that been something you've tried to do?
Yeah, yes and no. Look, to be honest, I haven't done a lot of conferences. I've listened to a lot of podcasts, and a lot of the banks in which we deal with have been very fortunate to put out, Zoom calls and those things where you can sort of dial in and have them running in the background, or you can listen to them, after. I've got quite a bit out of that process. I've probably listened to more recordings than I've actually attended the actual virtual conference, if you want to call it that as well. But I've done a couple of them, and I think they've worked really, really well. They've been, dialing in, dialing out. I've listened to a couple in Asia. I think the other really nice thing is I've listened to a couple in Europe. So, at 10 o'clock at night, you can sit back, you can actually dial into the conference, whereas, previously you might have tried to be there in person, which clearly isn't happening. But you're still not missing out on that global perspective by attending those conferences or listening to the recordings.
It's interesting because I agree. I think from a technical perspective, what's actually happened with those conferences, it's got a lot better, and you don't have to travel. You can do it all virtually. The piece that's missing for me as a salesperson or a vendor is not actually being able to meet face to face. No one has been very good at doing networks virtually. It's all either a lot of people on one screen or one-on-one communication, and it's just really, really hard to get value out of a conference. Have you found the same?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Look, I've been to a couple where there has been sort of those one-on-one sort of, well, not one-on-one, but sort of afternoon conversations and meet and greets, and I've dialed into one of them and there was no one else there. So maybe I was in the wrong room. But I do think that people are sort of listening to content and then stepping away. They're not using that virtual capacity that they can do to get that interaction still. And it goes a little bit to my earlier comment around new recruits. Having that physicality is really important. So, you and I have got a really nice dialogue going over the screen when there's two of us. You almost suddenly you put 3 or 4 in the room, it can be a little bit disjointed and that you lose a little bit of that momentum. So, I think it's really important. We've got a team call on Monday to introduce everyone to the new procurement team as they are part of my broader remit. And that's important because, you want everyone to start to interact. So I think you've got to make sure you're facilitating those environments, because if you're leaving it up to individuals to sort of dial in and dial out, I think you lose a lot of that power.
Yeah. And like you say, it's the social interaction piece, isn't it? And the softer part of it that's the hard bit. Like, to just get fact across or information content, it's easy enough to deliver that over video, but relationships and softer skills are the hard bit to get.
Absolutely. And you put that back in the work environment we were talking previously. That's one of the reasons we have synchronized days in the office. When you're not working from home and you are back in the office, it's really important to have that physicality there and to be able to have the conversations in person. We're not going to lose that through COVID. People have that natural ability to want to be able to form relationships and talk to people and have a community around them as well. So that's going to be important in the workplace going forward as well, not just the virtual environment in which we are currently working in.
David, we've talked a lot about the way things have changed in those 3 years, and technology has definitely been a common theme there. Process improvement is always another one. The payments landscape is changing really quickly from a treasury perspective. What have you been focused on from your treasury perspective and implementing new things? What's really on your radar from a technology perspective, from a treasury perspective?
Yeah, certainly. Look, I wouldn't say we're implementing anything new at the moment. We, as an organisation, Stockland, have been putting in a significant ERP system across the organisation. So we are moving our existing treasury management system into a more broader organisational piece. So that's been a lot of time translating that across and making sure the data's correct. What comes with all those changes to systems is particularly around valuation, rate curves, FX curves. So we've spent more time focusing on that transition period over the last sort of 6 months. We're in our 4-year results period right now. So precedence has been getting to make sure that information is right for our financial statements. We've done a few things around the payment space in relation to more around procurement and those areas as well. How we optimise some of our supplier spend and our payments. There's plenty of organisations around at the moment, Early Trade and a couple of others that are, providing opportunities to do things a little bit differently. So we're looking at those sort of opportunities as well. But realistically, from a technology perspective, we haven't gone far and wide. We've really been focused internally on getting our internal system right from the old system that we've been using as well.
And over the last 3 years, do you think the keys to success as a treasurer have changed much, or do you still see the key things that you need to focus on to be successful quite similar to where they were before?
Yeah, look, I think I don't think any treasurer can step away from the sort of core 4 things, if I can call them that, around liquidity management, funding, funding and investor management, financial risks. And then obviously I think documentation and process is also in there as well. I don't think we can step away from that. I think what we probably haven't talked a little bit about, it's like anything with a crisis, I think it actually helps elevate treasury and treasurers and those things as well around these roles. Last year, we were really focused on liquidity, and once again, you go back to the GFC, we were really focused on liquidity and, financial risk, what was doing to the portfolio. that changed. Obviously, the circumstances were very different across those two sort of black swan events, if you want to call them that. But, you know, those things are underpinned by the treasurer role. I do think broader in your thinking. I think a treasurer needs to be more strategic in how it approaches things. You know, thinking about funding in the capacity of just, you know, managing a debt profile or managing a weighted average cost of debt, you know, is quite limited. You've got to tie that back to cash flows coming from the business. You've got to tie that back to ALM. You've got to tie that back to, you know, the strategic imperatives and what the organisation is trying to over, either its long-term forecast or a strategic plan or its 5-year plan from a board perspective. So I think you've got to have that high-level view about, you know, what is the organisation doing and then how do I support that? And that takes it away from being a very one-year focused or a very narrow focused around what's my WACD going to be like in FY21 to what is my WACD going to be like over a 5-year period and how do I think about the debt profile and the funding profile over a period as well.
David, it's been a pleasure as always. I can't believe 3 years have passed since we last sat down like this. So thank you very much for your time and I look forward, hopefully, to catching up with you at the next conference.
Yeah, sounds great, Simon. I really appreciate you making the time. Thanks for having me along. Thank you.